Hello and welcome back to the channel where once again it's time for another Sega Saturn review, with us today revisiting a title that I did review several years back in the form of the futuristic racing game known as Wipeout, a title which first saw release obviously on the PlayStation way back in November of 1995 before coming out on the Saturn initially in March of 1996 in the PAL territory, before coming out in May in North America and then finally in Japan in July. So if you are completely new to my Saturn review series, what I'm doing is reviewing every single game that saw release in the PAL territory and coming up with a comprehensive PAL top 10. Now don't worry, because if you're a non-PAL gamer, I'm also covering games that saw worldwide releases too, and coming up with a comprehensive worldwide top 10 as well. Currently atop of both top 10s is the incredible Dragon Force. I haven't found any games whatsoever on the Saturn that have got the quality to knock Dragon Force off either the PAL or worldwide top 10. So of course the big question today is Wipeout the game to do it, as it is getting a very fortunate second chance to impress me. Once you hit the main menu, you'll see you've got a choice of start, race or options. When you head into options, you've got the choice of loading and saving your data, changing the control pad configuration, changing the audio settings, and also checking all of the best times for all of the courses. Once you've selected start race, you'll see you've got a choice of championship, single race and time trial, and once you go onto the vehicle selection screen, you'll see there are a choice of 4 teams, each with 2 unique drivers with their unique colour schemes for their vehicles to select from. Like always, I'm going to start with the visuals first, and despite not coming out until mid-1996, and also the fact it doesn't quite look as good as the PlayStation version, Wipeout on the Saturn is still one of the better looking 3D racing games on the console. The vehicles themselves are quite detailed and sharp looking, just like all of the tracks that you race on as well. I don't really think anybody can aim any criticism at these aspects of the Saturn port. Where this version of Wipeout inevitably gets criticism though is in the fact it runs at a lower frame rate, which isn't necessarily a problem if you've never played the PlayStation version of the game, but of course if you have, you will notice the difference. The other common criticism for the Saturn version is of course the fact that it has the rather unpleasant mesh effect transparencies within the game. They simply do not look very good, and there isn't anything positive that I can say about them. If developers could avoid using them in the games, I think that is a huge plus point, because they never usually add anything to the Saturn games that I've reviewed, at least anyway. They're always more of an eyesore than a plus point. There is also a fair amount of pop-up within the game too, but thankfully due to the incredibly good course designs that the game has, it does a very good job of hiding a significant amount of this, which is a plus point. The menu presentation within the game is relatively basic, but it does have a certain quality to it that fits in very well with the visual aesthetic the game possesses. And on the whole, despite the flaws that the Saturn version of Wipeout has, it's still a relatively good looking racing game for the system. Moving on to the sound effects and music next, and Wipeout is the ultimate definition of a mixed bag, a term that I've used several times when describing other games and the quality of their sound on the system. The positive point for Wipeout in this area is the music, with the Saturn version having a soundtrack primarily composed by Psygnosis' house band Cold Storage. Some people may say it's a downside because it doesn't have the same soundtrack as the PlayStation version, but the trance and techno style music on offer here fits the futuristic style racing within the game incredibly well, and is a huge plus point for the game for myself. Where the game doesn't perform very well at all though is in regards to the severe lack of sound effects within the game. I mentioned it when I first took a look at the game several years back, and I'm going to mention it again now because the game almost feels like a demo, somewhat lifeless because of the lack of sound effects within the game. The vehicles that you control are completely silent, and the engines make absolutely no sound whatsoever. In fact, the only really noticeable sound effect is when you clip the walls, something that you will inevitably do quite a lot. You do get the occasional voiceover when you pick up a power-up or a sound effect when you use it, but it doesn't really help. The game just feels like it heavily lacks in this area. But what I will do is what I always do, and that is give you some samples of the music within the game. In regards to the gameplay, Wipeout has a relatively simplistic control scheme with an accelerator, a left and right air brake, a button to use any power-ups that you collect, and the ability to switch between first and third person viewpoints. Unfortunately though, Wipeout isn't the best playing of racing games in my opinion. It's got a somewhat floaty control mechanic, and the vehicles do not feel particularly tight and responsive to control. In fact, Wipeout is quite a difficult game to get to grips with, and you'll have to invest a fair amount of time in honing your skill with the accelerator and also getting to grips with the air brakes. It really is only when you've mastered these skills that you will start to have success within the game. It simply isn't the kind of racing game that you can pick up and play and instantly have enjoyment and success with, and this really is where opinions of the game will be divided, because if you want a racing experience where you can pick it up, play it, and enjoy success relatively soon, Wipeout will more than likely frustrate and annoy rather than entertain. If, on the other hand, you want a racing game that will provide a strong challenge right from the get-go, then Wipeout may well be a racing game for you. So moving on to the content and lifespan next, and Wipeout has a championship mode, a single race option, and a time trial mode as well, with the championship mode being the main mode of play. You've got a choice of 2 difficulty settings here, with only Venom class initially available and Rapier class becoming unlocked once you place first in the Venom class championship. You've also got 6 courses initially selectable, with a 7th course becoming available once you have completed the Rapier class, and you have the 4 teams to select from, with 2 drivers for each and their own unique color schemes for their vehicle. There's also a variety of power-ups that you can use within the races too, such as boosters, rockets, and shields. In regards to multiplayer options, it's worth mentioning that the PlayStation version of Wipeout did have the option for link-up multiplayer, but the Saturn version of Wipeout has no multiplayer options whatsoever. It would be fair to say as well that there isn't really a whole lot of content to see here, and the lifespan of the game really comes down to the fact that it's actually a relatively difficult racing game to play and master, and how much lifespan it's going to give you really depends on how much you enjoy the gameplay and how much perseverance you have to get better at the game. So like always, that leaves me with my two final questions. Is Wipeout on the Saturn still worth playing nowadays? And does it potentially have the quality to make our PAL or even our worldwide Saturn top 10? Now in terms of whether it's still worth playing or not, you have to remember that Wipeout 2097 is also on the Saturn 2, and that game is vastly superior in terms of visuals, gameplay and content, and sounds just as good as the original game as well. Couple this with the fact that I believe Cyber Speedway is a much better game than Wipeout overall as well. It might not look as good, but everything else about that game I feel is better than the original Wipeout, so there isn't really much incentive to go back and play this game nowadays. Now in terms of it having the quality to make our PAL top 10 or worldwide Saturn top 10, I pretty much answered that question already. It really isn't anywhere near either. In fact, I'd almost say that the PlayStation version of Wipeout when it came out was pretty much a demo to showcase what the PlayStation could graphically do, but of course it came out quite a while later on the Saturn, so it really didn't make the same kind of impression when it came out on the Saturn. But of course these are just my thoughts and my thoughts alone, and like always I'm interested in hearing what everybody else has to say about the original Wipeout on the Saturn. Did you buy it when it came out, or were you one of the other people that bought it originally on the PlayStation? In fact, that's where the majority of people will have played this game. Let me know your thoughts down below, and like always I'll be back in the near future with another Saturn review. Goodbye for now.